This morning, the head of the prison where Joaquin El Chapo Guzman escaped has been fired.
The El Chapo escape fears are not unfounded. He tunneled out of the last Mexican prison where he was locked up and rode to freedom on an underground motorcycle.
A tunnel that was his highway to freedom. Opening the tunnel up to the press, the authorities show a well-resourced operation with electricity and air supply.
When El Chapo made his daring prison break from a supermax prison in Mexico, it was like something out of a fantasy movie. But then, it wasn't until officials discovered the 1,000-foot-long tunnel and the malicious hideout it led to that they came to terms with the reality that this criminal had indeed escaped. El Chapo pulled off one of the greatest escapes in history, an escape that many believed cost him millions of dollars. However, when experts began to dig further, they found out the fortune El Chapo spent in this daredevil prison break was enough to rebuild a city. It was on the 11th of July 2015 when news began to circulate around Mexico that El Chapo, one of the most notorious crime bosses in Mexico and the rest of the world, had escaped his prison cell. The news came as a shock, especially considering the fact that this man's cell was properly guarded with a CCTV camera positioned right in front of it to monitor his movements. However, when officials finally revealed how the criminal boss managed to pull this stunt, it became clear just how dangerous and rich the crime boss was.
This is the moment Joaquin El Chapo Guzman makes the Mexican government look ridiculous. Pacing up and down in his cell, calmly, waiting. These are the last images of Guzman before he makes the most daring escape in recent history. At one point, he appears to bend forward, focusing on something in the floor of the shower. Then, he sits down, appearing to remove his sandals. And then, he vanishes. We now know that under the shower was this hole, occupying a blind spot in the cell's CCTV cameras. Beneath it, a tunnel that was his highway to freedom.
Joaquin Guzman Loera began his crime journey right from a young age. Born April 4th, 1957, Guzman never had much as a kid. His family was poor, and he also had an abusive father who maltreated him. It was also his abusive father who introduced El Chapo to drugs, making him go on small drug trade errands. By his late teens and early adulthood, El Chapo had already begun growing marijuana for the local dealers. He soon became known in his local territory and would later gain leverage to partner with a big-time drug dealer in the 1970s, a man named Hector Luis Palma Salazar. Salazar was a big-time drug trafficker and cartel leader. Guzman's partnership with Salazar would earn him a close spot with the drug cartel leader, learning the ins and outs of running a cartel. Guzman had the task of making the best routes to move drugs across the border and into the United States. Later on, in the 1980s, Guzman would graduate to become the right-hand man of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, alias the Godfather. Gallardo was the founder of the Guadalajara cartel and is considered by many to be the godfather of drug cartels and trafficking. At the time, Gallardo controlled most of the drugs moving from Mexico to the US, and El Chapo, just like he did for Salazar, was in charge of logistics. He oversaw mass shipments of cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and distributed throughout the US and parts of Europe. The partnership was mutually beneficial, with returns in millions of dollars. However, all that ended when Miguel Felix Gallardo was arrested in 1989.
On April 8, 1989, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo was arrested at his home in Guadalajara. Country's #1 fugitive, the most powerful drug trafficker Mexico had ever seen, was taken into custody without a single shot being fired.
The arrest of Gallardo put Guzman in a tight spot, to sink or swim. As a smart and witty criminal mastermind, he decided to form his own cartel rather than continue the Guadalajara cartel. And so, he formed the Sinaloa cartel, though it consisted of many of the henchmen and associates who worked with Gallardo's cartel. It was at this point that Guzman gave himself the nickname El Chapo, which translates to Shorty. Guzman's leadership brought immense wealth, especially because he came up with a very creative way to ship drugs: tunnels. You see, unlike his ex-boss, El Chapo built extensive tunnels that went across the borders into the United States. He also was an expert at mapping out blind spots in the border for drug pushers to slip narcotics past Border Patrol agents. All of this brought in returns worth billions of dollars, and by the early 2000s, El Chapo had already made himself a reputation as one of the world's richest drug lords. Even Forbes' list couldn't help but recognize him as one of the world's richest and most powerful men, and some financial analysts and experts even compared his wealth and influence to that of Pablo Escobar. However, there was one other thing that made El Chapo more famous than any other drug lord anywhere in the world. It was his ability to pull off crazy stunts and break out of jail.
This morning, the head of the prison where Joaquin El Chapo Guzman escaped has been fired. Mexican authorities are offering a nearly $4 million reward for the drug kingpin's capture. The DEA reportedly warned Mexico more than a year ago about an escape plan.
How do you stop a criminal who apparently has the money and the resources and is working in a prison system where he allegedly had inside help? How do you stop somebody like that from getting away?
You know, Gail, this mishap is not the first one we've seen involving Mexican drug operations. It is a setback, but this one in particular is a big black eye to the Mexican government. And to deal with someone who, number one, has built-in propensity for escape, number two, has the audacity to actually do it, and number three, the very profound resources to make an escape because of the financial network behind him. I think they should have been looking much, much closer at this situation, perhaps even kept him in a military compound where he was under surveillance for 24/7.
El Chapo's jailbreak was the one thing that cemented his legacy as the true criminal mastermind. It was a shock to everyone, and even more of a slap in the face of Mexican law enforcement. And just so you know, El Chapo's escape was no luck. Rather, it was a carefully planned and perfectly executed master plan, one that took weeks and months. You see, El Chapo first gave the world a taste of his criminal superpowers back in 2001 while serving time in a maximum security prison. This was after he was arrested in 1993 and sentenced to 20 years in prison for murder and drug trafficking. Chapo at the time had secretly bribed prison guards and convinced them to help him escape. And so, the guards hid him in a bin of unwashed clothes till he was outside the prison walls. Authorities were provoked to say the least, and an $8 million bounty was immediately put on his head. However, it wasn't until many years later, in 2014, that Mexican authorities would finally lay hands on the drug baron one more time. The cartel leader was immediately put in max security confinement, awaiting a formal sentencing. However, the authorities never suspected that El Chapo had a trick up his sleeve, a trick that would turn him into a global phenomenon.
Mexican security officials say that top drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman has escaped prison. The near-mile-long tunnel built through an opening from the shower area of his cell was created without detection of prison guards. Mexico's security commissioner says the tunnel was equipped with PVC pipes for ventilation and lighting. Guzman, head of the powerful Sinaloa cartel, previously broke out from jail and was recaptured last year. Officials say the drug lord was last seen on Saturday evening in the shower area of the Altiplano Maximum Security Prison. Emily Roseman, The Associated Press.
It's not every day you see a man pull off two simultaneous prison breaks. However, El Chapo's second breakout was the true talk of the town and had Mexican authorities scratching their heads as to how he pulled it off. It was on July 11, 2015, when El Chapo pulled off the insane stunt. At about 8:52 p.m., El Chapo was last seen by the security cameras lingering around the shower area. This area was the only blind spot in his cell, meaning whatever happened inside wasn't visible to the security cams. El Chapo disappeared into the shower area and never came out. At first, nothing seemed unusual, so guards didn't bother checking in. However, after about 30 minutes had passed since El Chapo disappeared behind the shower, guards decided to check on him. That's when they encountered the shock of their lives. Right there in the shower area was a 1.5-foot wide hole that led to a tunnel underground. And it was not just any tunnel, it was a carefully crafted masterpiece.
El Chapo pulled off one of the most daring prison escapes in history. But how did he do it? On the night of July 11th, 2015, he suddenly vanished from his cell in Altiplano, which is Mexico's highest security prison. But this wasn't an ordinary escape. It was later discovered to be a meticulous Hollywood Chapo-style breakout. El Chapo's associates dug a tunnel stretching about a mile long, starting from a small house outside the prison. This tunnel wasn't just a rough passage. It was equipped with lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle mounted on rails, all designed thoughtfully. The tunnel led directly to the floor of his shower, the one blind spot from the prison security cameras. The operation was carried out with military precision as El Chapo descended into the tunnel where the motorcycle was waiting for him and he sped away.
It turns out that while the guards were unsuspecting, El Chapo had slipped through the hole and onto a 30-foot ladder underneath before disappearing through the tunnel. El Chapo's getaway tunnel was a 1.5-kilometer long tunnel, about 33 feet underground. How long it took for El Chapo's associates to plan out and dig this tunnel is still a mystery. However, one thing is certain, this tunnel was done by experts, which would explain why no one detected it, nor did anyone notice the underground activity that came with its construction. The tunnel measured 1.7 meters in height and 75 centimeters in width. Its size was big enough to contain an adult human and perfect for a short person like El Chapo. The builders used high-quality materials, reinforced the tunnel walls, and also installed artificial lights and air ducts. However, the highlight of it all was the motorcycle that was used to transport Guzman across the tunnel into a safe house on the outskirts of the prison.
The authorities show a well-resourced operation with electricity, an air supply, and this makeshift minecart adapted from a motorcycle, presumably used to move earth and people along its rails.
El Chapo tiene antecedentes.
El Chapo has a history. He's built at least 62 drug tunnels between Mexico and the United States. Throughout this area, he's built drug tunnels, so he has the experience and he has the technicians to do it.
A mile away from the prison, authorities examined where the tunnel emerged. Here was the first taste of the outside world El Chapo had since his incarceration in February last year. A makeshift house built to hide the digging below.
At first, El Chapo's escape was like a huge puzzle. Questions of when the tunnel construction began or where it led to were at the top of the list. When Mexican authorities finally began to piece the puzzles together, they concluded that El Chapo had spent a fortune on this expenditure. Analysis of the tunnel and the technicalities involved led officers to believe that it cost millions of dollars to build. You see, aside from the tools and manpower that were used to make this tunnel, a huge cost would have gone into research and tracking. You see, it took pinpoint accuracy for the enigmatic tunnel to end up right below the shower in El Chapo's cell. One wrong calculation, and the hole may have burst out in the middle of his cell or another inmate's cell altogether. However, the pinpoint accuracy employed in the construction of this tunnel took careful mapping and planning, and lots of money too. Experts suggest that many insiders must have been involved in the mapping process, and a whole bunch of others would have been bribed to stay quiet too. And so, even if the actual construction costs would have been around $15 million, bribes and other essential arrangements would make the total sum as high as $50 million. As for the building tools, it was deduced that the tools were stored in the abandoned home where the tunnel was dug out from. Of course, getting the necessary manpower to make the tunnels was no issue, as El Chapo and his associates were well into the business of making tunnels for shipping drugs. It is worth noting that Guzman El Chapo had used such tunnels to escape law enforcement several times in the past. One such incident took place on February 16, 2014, when Mexican authorities traced El Chapo down to his former wife's house. However, while they were busy trying to bring down the barricaded iron door, Guzman escaped through the intricate system of tunnels that connected the building with about 6 other houses in the vicinity. It is important to note that at this point, El Chapo had already become known as the most powerful drug trafficker in the entire world. Plus, he had over 34,000 deaths to his name, and thanks to his position as leader of the notorious Sinaloa cartel, he was also regarded as one of the most dangerous criminal bosses on the planet. And so, it was no surprise when this man became the #1 on Mexican law enforcement's hit list. Even US authorities joined in the hunt for El Chapo. It was thanks to this partnership that El Chapo was finally arrested days later in that same month in a hotel in Malecón, Jalisco. The operation was a joint effort involving the Mexican authorities, the Navy, the DEA, and the US Marshal Service. And just so you know, soldiers went through hell in capturing El Chapo. This scene from a Bodycam recording of the moment when soldiers stormed El Chapo's residence is more like World War II.
This dramatic footage of the raid on a house that led to the arrest of the drug boss Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was released by the Mexican government on Monday. The soldiers involved wore cameras as they blasted their way through the dwelling in Los Mochis in Sinaloa, exchanging gunfire with Guzman's henchmen, 5 of whom were killed in the raid. It's an insight into one of the world's most wanted drug traffickers who seem to like to mix truth with fiction. The Marines found DVDs of Reina del Sur, or Queen of the South, a TV series about a female drug lord. It stars Mexican actress Kate del Castillo, the woman who led Sean Penn to interview Guzman. This is the secret door and stairs hidden behind a mirror, down which Guzman fled before the soldiers eventually located and arrested him. He's wanted in the United States.
Capturing El Chapo was one ordeal. However, the real challenge was in how exactly to contain him. History had already proven that this man had the brains, the resources, and the muscle to break out of supermax prisons. And so, it was no surprise when the Mexican government handed him over to US authorities. This was the only way to ensure El Chapo wouldn't escape, as his influence would have no effect on US prison guards and officials. You see, during his first escape, it was revealed that El Chapo actually had influence over almost everyone in the prison. Most of the guards were on his payroll, so he was getting full access to drugs, women, expensive food, and lavish items that shouldn't be possible for a convicted drug kingpin. El Chapo enjoyed preferential treatment thanks to his already terrifying reputation and deep pockets. And so, when the time came for him to execute his escape plan, convincing the guards to help him wasn't an issue. Moreover, it is further believed that during his first escape, El Chapo paid off the Jalisco police force to give him a 24-hour head start. This is why he was already long gone before the police force could even catch his trail. In fact, it is estimated that the crime boss spent about $2.5 million during his first jailbreak. However, this is nothing compared to the millions of dollars he spent on his second breakout. It's estimated that the whole operation cost El Chapo a whopping $50 million. Imagine you had the honor of hosting a celebrity criminal who has been successful at not one, but 2 crazy escapes from prison. El Chapo's daunting prison breaks have made him a heavily protected inmate, as many fear he may try to pull off another jailbreak. The drug lord's cell is constantly under heavy watch 24 hours every day, and it would seem that the legendary kingpin has finally met his doom.
This caravan of law enforcement vehicles brought notorious drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to federal court. He faced the judge less than 24 hours after his surprise extradition from Mexico. In court, he was not shackled and appeared dazed as he said through an interpreter that he understood he's charged with 17 crimes, including massive-scale drug trafficking with money laundering in the billions of dollars.
Guzman's destructive and murderous rise as an international narcotics trafficker is akin to that of a small cancerous tumor that metastasized and grew into a full-blown scourge.
Before his extradition, the US government already had strong resentment for him, given the extensive damage his cartel drugs had done to Americans already. And so now that he's finally within their grasp, he's never going to get out alive.
You can actually see the fear. As the realization started to kick in that he's about to face American justice.
El Chapo will spend the rest of his life in a U.S. prison if convicted. Outside federal court in Brooklyn, Dave Carlin, TV 1055.
El Chapo's extradition to the U.S. was the beginning of the end for him. Following his extradition, he was flown from Mexico to the United States. Upon his arrival in the U.S., Guzman was initially held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in New York City, a high-security prison. Later, he was transferred to the ADX Florence in Colorado, a supermax federal prison known for housing high-profile criminals. No prisoner has ever broken out of this facility, as it is guarded to the core. Inmates only get to breathe fresh air for 1 hour every day. For the remaining 23 hours, they languish in solitary confinement.
Rob, the El Chapo escape fears are not unfounded. He tunneled out of the last Mexican prison where he was locked up and rode to freedom on an underground motorcycle. That was his second escape. Tonight, the I-Team has a letter from El Chapo in which he implies that U.S. prison officials are bullying him because he has escaped before.
This was El Chapo's new home. During his trial, El Chapo's legal team tried to argue that he was a scapegoat for others in the drug trade. They even attempted to paint El Chapo as nothing more than a mere farmer. a story that the crime lord has unsuccessfully used several times in the past. El Chapo's defense team was led by Jeffrey Lichtman, a prominent criminal defense lawyer. Lichtman had previously represented John Gotti Jr., and he was hired to defend El Chapo during his trial. However, despite all efforts, the team failed to make Guzman appear innocent before the court. El Chapo had to endure a rigorous 3-month trial, during which time over 50 witnesses, including former associates, testified against him. Multiple pieces of evidence were brought against him, including wiretaps, testimonies, and classified documents. At the end of it all, in February 2019, he was convicted on several charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and involvement in organized crime. On July 17, 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. The judge also ordered him to forfeit $12.6 billion, the estimated revenue from his cartel's drug trafficking activities. Since then, the Mexican crime lord has remained in ADX Supermax. But then, El Chapo isn't giving up on his freedom yet. Recent reports say he's scheming another means to become a free man again.
El Chapo has been on a crusade since arriving at the Supermax in Colorado to communicate with his attorneys and allow them to deliver documents to his prison cell as he works to concoct a legal move that would result in his unlikely release. No response to the I-Team tonight from Supermax officials, but the freedom that would concern them is more illicit, a jailbreak that no one has ever succeeded in pulling off.
What are your thoughts on this? Would El Chapo be able to pull off another prison break? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to our channel to enjoy more videos like this.